Hi, I'm Mark Graban. Welcome to My Favorite Mistake. Our guest today is Amy Rasdal. She's the founder of Billable at the Beach. Amy made a bold leap 15 years ago, leaving behind a successful corporate career to launch her own consulting business. Since then, Amy's built not just one, but multiple six-figure businesses while helping hundreds of others do the same. She's also the author of the book, Land a Consulting Project Now, and she brings deep experience from industries like internet software and medical devices. So, Amy, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me today, Mark.
Yeah, so it's going to be great to be able to talk about the type of work you do and your book and more. But as we always do here, and this will probably lead into the rest of that conversation, the different things you've done in your career. What's your favorite mistake?
I've made so many by this point that it was very hard to choose a favorite. But my favorite mistake was when I first started consulting on my own. I had always been an employee, a corporate employee, whether it was a huge corporation or a smaller startup. I'd never worked for myself. So I didn't know for sure what to charge. I did my homework. I had a dollar amount. I was confident. I knew I was worth it. And let me set the stage just a little bit. So I started my consulting business. I'm running along. I got into it a little bit accidentally when I was in between jobs, but I'm consulting. Things are going along great. I get a couple of years in and my pipeline, things start to slow down a little bit. At first, when I would have a dry spell, it would be, oh, great, let's take a little time off. Mm-hmm. I've been doing the corporate grind for so long. So my dry spell starts to stretch out. And about this time, I'm pregnant with my first child. So it's no longer just two carefree adults. We're going to have a mouth to feed. My dry spells are stretching out. I'd finally have this great lead. I'm at the company. I'm meeting with them. We're talking about this great consulting project. I'm super excited because I really needed the work. I knew what I was worth. I was confident. And even with all of that, we get to the point where they say, what's your rate? And even though I thought I was so confident, I found my mouth bidding out a dollar amount that was lower than what I knew I was worth. And I thought, what is going on here? And I realized later that really what drove me to do that and what drives other people to do that is fear. It's that fear that I'm going to be sitting across from you, Mark, and I'm going to say, $200, and you're going to laugh in my face. Yeah. Now, the reality is it's a professional setting. Is that really going to happen? And as I started working with other people through Billable at the Beach, helping them start their own consulting practices, almost everybody was doing this. Once in a while, I'd get some hotshot guy who'd say, I'm worth $1,000 an hour, who actually probably wasn't. But across the board, high-level, accomplished professionals, and there's this weird sort of fear of selling yourself, that you're not worth it. And then that led me into realizing that, in a way, that was kind of my gateway to really digging into the other mistakes that I was making, those things that were really limiting my forward progress in building my consulting business. Was that first mistake. So I think that's why it was my favorite, because I feel like it was the gateway mistake. I had made plenty before that, but that led me to start understanding my mistakes, why I was making them, and really putting things in place to make sure that I didn't do it again.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to talk about, this pricing thing that connects to me and the work I do. And I'm sure many others who are listening or thinking about going into this independent path. But, when we talked before, you'd made a comment that struck me that the company Billable at the Beach was built almost entirely on mistakes. Now, I can't imagine everything you did was a mistake, but, just being able to recognize a mistake and try to move forward and stop repeating the mistake. What was there a certain impetus where you realized, or a certain spark where you're like, oh, I am making these pricing mistakes? What
Yes, because once I finally had the confidence to start saying my number, what it really was worth, nobody ever batted an eye. So I did a couple of things to try and help that. And now I teach this to other people. So it's a little bit the fake it till you make it idea. And I have I'm an engineer by background. I can skew a little bit towards introvert, but I also have always done a lot of performing arts. And I think people don't realize a lot of performing arts people, you take them off the stage and they're fairly introverted. I don't know if you've ever seen a celebrity occasionally during an interview, and they seem so different from what you expected. So I started putting my performing arts hat on. And what I tell people now is that you have to practice it. You have to rehearse it and approach it a little bit like, even if you don't feel it like it's an act of some sort, and pretend the confidence. And what I tell them is that once you start doing that, then you'll gain the confidence. And like I say, I had my whole plan. All of a sudden, I'm like, mouth, what are you doing? What is that number? I never even, like, who gave you permission to say that number? And I realized once I started doing that, that nobody ever batted an eye. And I think the real light bulb came on when I started then working with other people to start their consulting businesses. I realized that there were these certain mistakes that almost everybody made, not charging enough. Things like wanting to immediately like sell out all their capacity at a discounted rate. These certain things that everybody was wanting to do. And I don't consider myself a mindset coach. I'm just super practical. And I thought, well, we better dig a layer deeper and figure out why are people doing that so we can stop them.
Yeah. Do you find, well, the whole question of setting a rate is complex. I mean, that one guy you said thought he was worth $1,000 an hour. Well, if at some point, if somebody or a lot of people are willing to pay it, then I guess by definition, the market has said he is worth that. But I guess, there is a real risk if we set a number that's way too high, you won't get more. I mean, I don't think in my work, speaking or coaching, I'm setting rates that are outrageously high. They are rates that people have paid. But to some, they might say, well, I can't afford that, or I don't have the budget. And instead of negotiating or pushing back, sometimes I think, people are embarrassed to do that. And I've been ghosted by potential clients, which makes me worry, okay, well, did I make a mistake or does that just happen? Curious your thoughts on a situation.
So you think you've been ghosted because your rate might be too high?
I think so. And the frustration about getting ghosted is you don't really know why. But I think sometimes people might feel it's awkward, or like they think, well, that's not negotiable, or it's embarrassing to say I can't
to come back.
That.
I haven't run into that. Most people have been, but it's true that sometimes people just can't afford it. And I think that's fine. And the whole idea of figuring out how you set your rate can be a tricky one, because you think it's like my house, right? I want to sell my house. It would be great if I could get $10 million for it. Fact is, the market isn't going to pay that. Now, with houses, it's pretty easy to kind of get a comparable. And I think that's where we start as consultants. One of the things that I like to talk about, especially even with high-level professionals as they're getting started, and it's funny, I was just having a conversation about that with somebody earlier today. I'm not afraid to do an hourly rate. And I know you do a lot of consulting, and I don't know where you got started, Mark, but I don't think it's not only for people who work at McDonald's. I think it's perfectly fine as you get started with your consulting, figure out what you're doing. For me, I was doing big projects with big companies. And until I dug in and got started, it was really hard for me to know what we were really going to find when we got in there. So I think it's fine. And the whole idea of pricing, I think, is really complex. And you bring up an interesting point of How do you get the customer feedback? How do you build that relationship so you can have a dialogue? I'm sure there's a price point where you're not interested. And I also was just listening to another podcast this morning that was talking about pricing, and it was talking about a particular sector of consulting and kind of the state of the union and where it's going. And they were talking about finding a lot of success lately because people are concerned about spending to considering more kind of micro offers. So for you, if you're selling a talk or a presentation, or maybe you do a talk and a training or something like that, to scale into a smaller offering so that somebody can get into it. So that was an interesting conversation too.
Yeah.
So I don't know, the ghosting, that's an interesting conversation.
Well, let's talk about the pricing. I'm not going to solve that. You could sound like it happens all the time, but I think a couple of times that has happened. But, I think, you brought up another mistake, wanting to sell out all of your capacity at a discounted rate. And it seems like the one issue with that might be, well, if you're 100% busy or overwhelmed at that low rate, that should be a pretty clear signal you're not asking enough, that your prices are too low, and that you could probably be more profitable, less stressed, have more time to go to the beach, if you will, charging a higher rate and being a little less busy, or being able to better pick and choose the clients that are the best fit otherwise. What do you think about that?
No, I completely agree. Although what I find with the people, especially earlier in their consulting career, not always early. Now, I'm getting people who are in my Billable at the Beach program who are making, in general, the leap from corporate to consulting for the first time. So they haven't done that before. It feels scary. It feels insecure. A lot of times people make that jump because they've had some sort of a catalyst. The most common one is losing your job, right? Getting laid off, which I think we're having a bit of these days, and there's probably going to be some more continuing into the new year. So people jump off into consulting. It doesn't cost a lot of money to get into it. You really already have the skills. So the people who are wanting to sell all their capacity out right away, what I discovered is they're really looking to lock in stability. They're scared. They don't have that paycheck. They want to lock it in. But what they don't realize is you're selling out all your capacity. You're not leaving room for other higher paying clients. You're not taking advantage of all the things that you can do as a consultant. In my version of consulting, there's a lot of discussion out there about fractional these days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so to me, fractional is more like a part-time job. Mm-hmm. I don't want you to get a part-time job. I want you to be a superhero with superpower, making super pay. I want you to come in, do your really important high impact work, and then I want you to move it on to your next client. But what that requires, and I know that you do this because you have a long-term successful business, you have to work your pipeline. So selling out your capacity at a discount, it means you don't leave room for higher paying work. And if you sell out all those hours, when are you going to be working on your pipeline? You have to leave room in your schedule. So one of my other mistakes, which kind of goes along with not charging enough, is trying to bill too many hours. Mm-hmm. So a full-time consultant, now whether you're billing hourly or retainer or whatever, you need to do consulting work about 30 hours a week. Mm-hmm. And the rest of the time, it's going to take a little bit of time to just sort of maintain your business, taxes, health insurance, new computer software, that kind of stuff. You need to spend the rest of that time doing networking, marketing, and business development, right, to keep your pipeline full. If you don't keep your foot on the gas of that sales engine, then you're going to find yourself where we started this episode, dry pipeline, baby on the way, no money in the bank. Thank goodness for zero interest credit cards. So it's an interesting kind of mix of things that all go into this business of being a consultant.
Yeah. Because I think not leaving any time for networking, marketing, business development is one of the things that leads to those feast and famine, boom and bust cycles, especially if somebody only has one client. And there's a difference between, I think, people who go into consulting and they're basically doing one full-time contract gig after another versus juggling and balancing multiple clients at the same time. It might be possible to make sure all your clients, let's say if you're in a business where you have 6 clients simultaneously, hopefully all 6 of those aren't coming on board and off board at the exact same time. That you're kind of leveling out the starts and stops, and that would be another way of maintaining a more constant book of business, it seems.
Yes, and the reality is that's a little bit scary. And it was so funny at the beginning. I thought, well, I don't want to do too much outreach because what if I have too much business? And somebody looked at me and said, Amy, get over it, right? That'll be a good problem to have. And here's the thing. Somehow it just doesn't seem to happen that often. And I can work a few 60 or 70 hours a week. I don't want to do that forever. But what happens is there is a little bit of ebb and flow. I kind of like that. So maybe I work a few 80-hour weeks and then I work a few 15-hour weeks, So there is some ebb and flow. And there's always a little bit of anxiety about, is it all going to come in at the same time? But somehow we work that out. And if you look at all of our corporate jobs, it happens there too. It's just that we can't really do anything about it. All of a sudden, all these projects come to bear. And we happen to be talking here in the middle of December, this conversation where I bet you there's a lot of people out there thinking, oh man, how am I going to get all this stuff done before the end of the year?
Yeah. There's another question to ask, people transitioning from corporate to being independent, to being consultants. So inevitably, they're going to look at their compensation in the corporate gig and try to do the math of, if I'm billing on average X number of hours per week, here's what I want or here's what I need to make. And, like you said, some people get kind of thrown into being independent. Some people are doing it as a choice, but it seems like ideally that would be the type of math that would be done up front to see if that quote unquote, this is what I need rate actually lines up with what the market could pay. Is it possible that somebody is just more compensated in corporate than they could be in consulting, or is that just a challenge to figure out?
So, Mark, I actually hate that math. And I tell people,
cringe. And I'm not trying to recommend that.
No, I tell people never do that math. And here's why. Because I've been teaching people, helping people start their own consulting businesses, probably 80% of them who've been laid off. It's scary, In my experience with hundreds of people, that math always leads to a rate that's too low. You would think, oh, maybe it's going to be too high. So I understand your question is, what if you just happen to be extraordinarily highly compensated? So everyone out there, raise your hand if you think you're making more money than you should. I'm my own boss, and I don't think I'm making more money than I should. So for sure, there could be a case like that. But usually what happens in that math, Mark, is that people underestimate by it should be double all the benefits, the life insurance, the health insurance, the training, and these days, my daughter just started her first corporate job. She's a mechanical engineer at a medical device company. And now all the companies have unlimited PTO. So there's not even any more 2 or 3 weeks vacation. So she's been there for 5 months and she just got back from 3 weeks in Africa paid. And I'm like, wait.
So there's almost that question.
Too late?
There's that question of, is it a mistake to really treat it as unlimited? But that depends on.
Yes, of course. And I'm making light of this, but she went in saying, look, I already had this trip planned.
Yeah.
So no, you're absolutely right. But what happens with that math, Mark, is we divide it. And if I don't like this math, but if you do want to try and do an hourly thing, then double it. But the real story is you already started off the pricing conversation by saying, at the end of the day, it's what the market will bear. So you could do some benchmarking. You could do some checking around. And I'm sure that, I do that in my world. I'm sure that you do that in your category of coaching and speaking and all that kind of stuff to just kind of see where it is. And then you can do some playing with it. So I do think there's a lot to be said. If you're selling out your capacity so easily, there's probably room to take it up.
Right.
And again, at the end of the day, it's what the market will pay.
Yeah. One other challenge with trying to set rates is the question of, do you do time-based billing that would either be per hour, per day, or something that's a little bit more project or results based, almost more of a flat fee. And like when I've worked for larger consulting firms that would do project-based billing for a certain scope, people always try to then go do the math and figure out what's the implied daily rate, even if you're trying to get away from that. But what are your thoughts more generally about, time-based versus something more flat rate or project-based?
Yeah, so I have a lot of thoughts on this. In my program specifically, I help people who are just getting started. So I really encourage people to start out with some form of hourly type billing. So for me, a lot of times what that looks like is I meet with a client, we talk about the project, the scope, the deliverables. We have enough of a relationship where I've been referred or recommended, which most new consultants do, because the first thing you do is start talking to all of your relationships, the people who know you, the people where you already have that, right, know, like, and trust, the KLT factor. So you already have that established. They know you, they trust you, they know you do good work. We'll talk about the deliverables and then I'll say something like, look, I'm going to work about 10 to 15 hours a week. Here's what we're going to get done. I won't bill ever more than the equivalent of 20 hours a week without going back to you. So you have some expectation of what it's going to be, but you haven't specified hard scope, hard deliverables with a set project fee. So that's really tricky to do, especially when you're getting started. Here is an interesting twist, though. I spent a lot of years speaking once a month at a company called Lee Hecht Harrison, which is an outplacement services firm. So people who get laid off from big enough companies, high enough positions, get outplacement services to help them find their next job. So every month I had, it went remote during COVID, so this in-person thing doesn't exist anymore. I had a room full of about 60 people every month who had been laid off, and I would do a little talk on how to start a successful consulting business. So I would have people from all different backgrounds. And in San Diego, where I am, we have a lot of defense contractors. And we would start going down the path of fixed bid. And I would say, if you are going to do a fixed bid, do a top down, do a bottom up, do your very best estimate to be as accurate as you possibly can. And then add 40%. Because no matter what you do, you're going to be off. And I would have guys occasionally from the defense contract world where they do that. And they said, 40. Oh, no, we add 60%. We have a lot of experience. We have a whole department that does this. No matter how good and careful we are, we add 60%, Mark. The thing is, it's really hard. And then there's all these different combinations. There's retainers. One that I like that I learned from somebody else is not to exceed. So it kind of feels a little bit like a fixed bid, but it leaves you room so that if the scope really starts to change, you dig in, you find unexpected things, then it makes it easier to have a conversation. And I think the most important thing is open conversations. As soon as you discover something, you need to put it on the table, not right away, because you want to present the problem and some potential solutions at the same time, but you need to get out there and do it. And so fixed bid, in a lot of the type of consulting projects that me and my people do, it's tricky.
Yeah.
Right?
It seems like maybe the more well-defined and repeatable the engagement is, the easier it would be to know a rate. Something that 20 years ago, again, was part of a consulting group. It was part of Johnson & Johnson, worked with medical laboratories, healthcare organizations, and there was a pretty repeatable program of going in and helping reconfigure, for example, it started with hospital laboratories and saying pretty reliably, here's the 16-week program and here's the timing, and you're going to have someone on site this many weeks a month, and here's the fee. And that got much more complicated once clients started pulling us into other departments. Pharmacy is different than a laboratory, emergency department's different than but I think there was a lesson there, and that business thankfully was busy enough. It was in the situation of, even though the clients had a relatively urgent need, they would also wait a couple of months if need be to get started, which allowed kind of building a bit of a backlog, so what the next project for somebody is.
And I do think there are consultants. It's interesting that we're talking about this, because I'm working on a new product offering for my own consulting business that I'm going to start working on. I am becoming certified to deliver this little product called a strategic mapping model. So I'm doing a program to learn that. And I have never targeted or worked a lot with small business. And I decided that I want to do something a little bit different. So I'm going to go after a small business. So this is a set. I don't want to use the term cookie cutter, because that sort of makes it sound less sophisticated than it is. But it's a set process, a set model. It has steps that you go through, so that I will offer as a fixed fee. And then as I start to make this kind of play around in my consulting offerings with smaller business, my goal will be to, like you had with J&J, productize some little pieces and make an attempt at that, just to work with some different people, different businesses than I've worked with in the past.
It's funny, you're making me think, sometimes we use these phrases and we don't step back to think about them, how quote unquote cookie cutter is seen as such a negative. But here we are about a week before Christmas, and somebody was going to be making dozens of Christmas cookies or holiday cookies. It would be crazy to try to shape each one
each one with a knife, right?
Knife.
Yeah.
Cutter was a very, very
tool. It's a tool, right?
Tool. But man, I don't have any Christmas cookies sitting around. Maybe off to.
I'm a cheater, and I buy them pre-made, so we just get to do the fun decorating part, not all the rolling it out and the messy part.
Yeah, not cookie cutter decorating. But so before I've got a couple of questions to wrap up, and I want to go back and ask a follow-up question I forgot to ask about your performing arts background. What was that?
Oh, so I loved college. So I actually went to undergrad on a music scholarship. It was not Juilliard. It was San Diego State. Nothing too exciting, but I started out majoring in music and computer science.
Oh.
I never intended, I knew even at that young age that it would be difficult to make a living and pay the bills in performing arts. And while I was in college, I also started dancing. So music and dance have been my things. I don't play as much music anymore, but I still do quite a bit of dance, which I just love.
Yeah. What was your instrument?
Clarinet. Are you a musician?
I used to be. I still play. I'm a drummer, percussionist.
Great.
Played all sorts of things pretty seriously through college, but I hit the decision point, not a mistake, to not major in music. But I had a roommate that was a double major in music and computer science.
I think they go together sometimes.
Especially if you're trying to go into the world of music software or technologies or what have you. But I'm curious your recollections of we've all made a mistake on stage in front of people. Were there any lessons that you remember from performing?
Yeah, so it's so interesting to me because in my early days in the corporate world, I'm a Silicon kid. I grew up in Silicon Valley. My dad was an early semiconductor guy. So my corporate career was always technology kinds of stuff, first software and then medical devices. And I started out engineering. Even after business school, I spent a lot of time running large product development programs. So it was very common that I was the only woman in the vicinity. And there were always a lot of talk and emphasis on sports and people wanting to hire guys who had played sports and played college sports and been on teams and all this stuff. And I thought I had been a diver in high school, but it wasn't a team thing. And in some ways, it's almost more of a performance being a diver than it's not a game or, it's competition in a different way anyhow. So I've really come to realize what a benefit it is to have that performing experience. There is a lot of teamwork. And I think the biggest thing, Mark, is mistakes. How do you deal with mistakes? Because if you're doing live performance and there's nothing like it, I actually loved the mistakes. In the dance world in San Diego, we do a lot of what we call site-specific work. And one of the dance companies that I'm involved with, we have this thing, was just the 20th anniversary, I can't believe it, called trolley dances. So San Diego built a trolley line. We got a grant from the Metropolitan Transit District. And every fall, we do a little trolley dances thing. So you do a tour on the trolley and you stop at 6 or 7 different places and you get off and there's a dance. So a lot of them are things like I did one in a train station where the dancers were all just kind of like sitting around and all of a sudden nobody knows what's happening. It's kind of like a little bit like a flash mob. Mm-hmm. The music comes on and then we just start dancing. People are walking through it. There's strange things happen. And that doesn't only happen in site-specific work. You're on stage and all of a sudden something happens and a fire alarm goes off. And then we used to actually create this. This is very juvenile, Mark, but I can remember a time when we have the conductor's score and someone snuck in there and put like a Playboy centerfold in the map of the score. So he gets to a certain point and then his payback was we came out on stage one night and here's a piece of music that we've never seen. He says, okay, here we go. Now we're going to play this. And I loved that. Yeah. So this idea of faking it, thinking on your feet, I think that you learn so much about just kind of how to be in life and a certain level of confidence that serves you so much. And I don't care what you do, you have to perform. You always are going to have to talk to management or your employees or the boss. And if you can take a step back and view that as a performance, something about it makes that easier to do.
Yeah. And I also think back and reflect on mistakes I made as a performer. And a lot of them were in the context of, college marching band and thinking of how leaders reacted to mistakes and coached you through a mistake, the range of reactions where, one of my most traumatic musical memory was playing in like a high school honors regional orchestra. And there's a timpani solo at the end of one of the movements of Gustav Holst's The Planets. And I just completely botched it. I came in at the wrong time and it was botched. And the conductor, before coming back out for applause, he like stomped off. And he was just, staring daggers at me. Like he never yelled at me because I knew I had messed up. Yeah. He knew I had messed up. But, it was a very human reaction. But, I think of examples in college where, it's one thing to have the mistake be pointed out, but, I don't remember ever feeling belittled or, it was more of a, okay, hey, let's make sure you're aware you made the mistake so that we can maybe not do it again in a more positive.
Absolutely. Right. It's that who among us hasn't sent an email to the wrong person?
Like literally, I mean, the wrong email or the wrong person?
Wrong email to the wrong person. I can remember the first time one of my employees did that, and she came and she was young and she was just mortified. And I'm just like, look, everyone has done that. Everyone has. You just got to own it, apologize. Yeah.
Good lesson. So one other question before we wrap up. Our guest again today, Amy Rasdal. The book, as we've talked about, her experience and expertise. Land a consulting project now. That's a delightfully straightforward value proposition from the book. But your firm, I'd love to hear before we wrap up the story behind Billable at the Beach, other than you're in San Diego.
Sure. I'm in San Diego. So when I first started consulting, I'd been involved in a startup. We went up like a rocket and it was amazing. And then gravity got us and we crashed and burned hard and fast. So I found myself looking for a next job. Consulting project fell into my lap, part-time, brings in some money while I'm looking for the next job. I got a few weeks into that and I said, cancel the job search. This is the life. I loved it. So in San Diego, I also started water skiing at the same time. So it was awesome. I would get up really early. I would go water ski when the water's really calm. And then I would come back and a lot of my work was remote, even before the remote work days that we all grew into over COVID. And I would be a little cold because I'd been in the cold ocean and I'd come back, I'd take a shower, I'd put on my bathrobe and I'd start to work. So my husband and I always laughed about Billable in your bathrobe. And that didn't sound quite so good. So we came up with the idea of, Billable at the beach. And because I am in San Diego and I live close to the beach and spend a lot of time there, but it's the idea of being aspirational. Billable at the beach. Your beach can be the mountains or a golf course or traveling, hiking the Dolomites in Italy, whatever your beach is. Yep. It's that kind of dreamy, aspirational idea of who doesn't want to be billable at the beach.
Yeah, well, it's a great goal. And it's great to hear how you're working toward that and helping others work toward that as well. So again, our guest, Amy Rasdal, check out the show notes for links to her website, her book, LinkedIn, and more. Great conversation. Sorry that I got veered off into my timpani mistake horse.
I love it.
Thank you for sharing your favorite mistake, your lessons learned, and for being a guest here today.
Thanks for having me, Mark. Great conversation.
As always, I want to thank you for listening. I hope this podcast inspires you to reflect on your own mistakes, how you can learn from them or turn them into a positive. I've had listeners tell me they started being more open and honest about mistakes in their work. And they're trying to create a workplace culture where it's safe to speak up about problems, because that leads to more improvement and better business results. If you have feedback or a story to share, you can email me, myfavoritemistakepodcast@gmail.com. And again, our website is myfavoritemistakepodcast.com.